Hello, welcome to the Unlocking Landscapes podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Greenwood. In this episode, I'm joined by someone you've never heard of, my good friend, Eddie Chapman. Eddie is a devoted rambler and part-time rapper who lives in Glasgow, Scotland. Eddie grew up in the Derbyshire town of Chesterfield and developed a love for the landscape through hiking in the nearby Peak District. He now spends his walking time bagging munros in the Scottish Highlands. So this is part one of 2 episodes covering a trip Eddie and I undertook across Hungary and Romania in 2015. In part 1, we recount our travels through the Great Hungarian Plain en route to the Romanian Carpathians. It's a light-hearted episode with recollections of unusual experiences, including owl-headed bodybuilders, firewater and rural sports bars. All this was experienced as we walked the Great Plain and fumbled our way through Europe by train. We saw some incredible wildlife in one of Europe's most important landscapes, the Great Hungarian Plain. And we would definitely recommend it if you're into birds. But do listen to what we did wrong. The episode contains an important safety message. Don't take risks out on the water and always bring safety equipment with you. Don't make the same stupid mistakes that we did if you visit the River Teesar. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the episode as much as we did recording it. Hi Eddie.
Hi Dan, how's it going?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Very well.
Thank you so much for joining me on this special episode of Unlocking Landscapes.
Thanks for having me along. It's nice of you to invite somebody who isn't a published writer or noted photographer.
Well, you know, I do like to appeal to the common man. So today we've got a very special episode of Unlocking Landscapes because me and Eddie are going to be talking about a very interesting trip that we had in March 2015 when we travelled to Romania via Hungary, mostly by train. But it was a journey.
It was a bridge too far.
It was well, there were many bridges incomplete that we saw out of the train window, particularly in Romania. But it was a trip that I think we'd wanted to do. I mean, I know I wanted to do it, having read the books of Patrick Lee Fermor, who walked from London, from the Netherlands to Istanbul before the Second World War. And he spent a lot of time in Hungary and Romania before the Second World War, when they're very different countries. And it really inspired me to want to go and visit there. I had a Hungarian friend who also turns out to be the #1 fan of Unlocking Landscapes. So, Vicky, if you're listening, I hope you enjoy, and I hope we don't insult your heritage too much or your homeland.
Sorry for everything that is about to be said and any misrepresentations of your wonderful country.
That was really good. Can we get you on here every time to say that? I'd also
disclaimer at the start of every episode.
you notice how I said we. It's only me. I don't know why I'm saying that. The journey was from London for me. Where were you at the time? You were in Manchester? Or were you in Scotland?
I was living in Aberdeen at the time.
Aberdeen.
Yeah, so I mean that was a long way to go. Anywhere I went from Aberdeen was a long way, but yeah, that certainly felt it.
Yeah. So I travelled from London to Brussels, and I actually went to Germany first for a couple of days, which was completely out of the way, and I paid for that, but we'll get into that later. And then we met up.
When you say you paid for it, oh, you did. You paid for it twice, I guess.
Well, I literally paid for it, but then also paid for the excursion and the storm that came in. But we'll get to that, I suppose. But then we went. Then we met in Budapest.
We did.
The capital of Hungary. And then we travelled to a name that both of us will get wrong, which if you're English and you're reading it on the page, it looks like Hortobargi. But I do believe, speaking to my friend Vicky, who is fluent in Hungarian, as a Hungarian herself, says that it's Hortobágy. And I've probably again got that wrong, but Hungarian is a very difficult language for an English speaker to learn, because it's not like other European languages, and I think it's more closely related to Finnish. And then we crossed over via Debrecen. We went into Romania, and we stayed in Cluj. I think it was just one night, wasn't it?
1 night in Cluj, yeah, that's right.
And the thing that most people not be aware of, when you go into Romania, a lot of places there also have a Hungarian name, and it's because the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was basically carved up after the First World War, a lot of places which were under the Hungarian territory then became under Romanian territory. So Cluj is also known as Kolozsvár, which I think I've got right. And then from Cluj, we went to a place called, the Romanian name is Miracurea, and the Hungarian name is Csík-Sereda. And I think in English it means the Cheek Mountains, but that's in the Lower Carpathians. That's in the, I think it was described to us as the Carpathian Basin. There were mountains there, but they were smaller than the High Carpathians, which is where we ended up. So we ended up in Sinaia, which is effectively like a ski town, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely a ski town. Yeah, like a faux ski resort, really.
But yeah, and then we both travelled our separate ways home from Bucharest on a British Airways flight, I think it was, wasn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. So if we get into the journey itself, I had a few days extra before meeting you, Eddie, and I got a train from London, St Pancras, the Eurostar, went to Brussels, and then from Brussels to Frankfurt, and I stayed in Frankfurt overnight. That was the first time for me in that city. Yeah, so I stayed in Frankfurt for one night in this nice hotel, and the next day I travelled to Bavaria, and I stayed for 3 nights in a place called Oberammergau, which is in the Bavarian Alps, and did some hiking around there. That was pretty cool. But it was not great because I was going to meet you in Budapest, and my journey was completely disrupted by an epic storm which came in and totally derailed the German railway network, and I couldn't get to Munich in time to actually get the train, and I couldn't actually get to Munich in time to get the train, so I missed the train that I'd already paid for that would have taken me directly to Budapest. Would have been really easy. And the reason was because the roof of the Munich Hauptbahnhof, the railway station, it collapsed because of high winds, and so I was standing outside the railway station with thousands of other people, and I was like, I don't know what to do. I have to get to Budapest. So I walked up the road to a cafe, an internet cafe, and I went on the Eurolines website and I found I could get a bus overnight from Munich to Budapest. And so that's what I did. And it was truly exhausting. The bus itself, I think it left at like 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night. And I woke up in the middle of the night and the bus was being boarded by plainclothes police, German police, and they were asking everyone for their passports, and they were taking people off the bus and going through their luggage. But it was very long, and it seemed like it was never going to end. I just wondered, I thought, if this is happening now, am I actually going to ever get there to meet you in Budapest? But, in the end, we made it through the night and arrived in Budapest something like 12 hours later or something like that. And I cannot tell you how relieved I was to actually get there. It was really stressful.
Yeah, it looked really stressful. I hadn't quite joined the trip yet, as you've mentioned. I was still in Aberdeen, still working a few days. So I was tracking your progress over Facebook and via WhatsApp messages and stuff. It looked really stressful.
Yeah, it was an absolute mission. But so we were staying in an apartment in Budapest, and I remember just crashing when I got in there. It was just such a relief to actually get there. But in Budapest, we we went to a nightclub that had seemed to have a theme of owls.
I think there was a theme of owls all over Budapest, actually. It was really weird. I've got quite a few pictures of owl-based artwork from various like bits of architecture and menus and strange-looking owl beings in clubs.
Yeah, and there was a big it's not a painting or a big photograph on the wall because this nightclub was like a bit like a disused building that had been turned into a nightclub, and there was a picture of
it was one of the ruin pubs. That's kind of got quite a, it's a famous sort of nightlife scene. I think the ruin pubs.
I see. Okay, but on the wall there was a picture of like a shirtless bodybuilder with a short-eared owl on his head.
I think you just drank too much Palinka, mate. You were hallucinating.
We should be drinking Palinka.
You were tripping out, man.
Well, can you tell me what Palinka is?
I can tell you what it is, and I can't tell you what it is. It's some kind of... Is it some kind of brandy? Yeah, but it's just essentially like firewater. I mean, I remember some of the stuff that we had to drink was like 60% or whatever. It went straight to your head. Obviously, you were seeing shirtless bodybuilding owls.
Yeah, well, it's just like looking in the mirror, isn't it, really? But the thing that sticks out for me about Budapest was the statue park that we went to, with those Soviet-era incredible statues of these, like sort of cartoonish, like Incredible Hulk-style, military officers and stuff, and statues of Stalin and Lenin.
Yeah, that was amazing. I mean, sort of communist era sort of statues have got a really dramatic look about them. They're really foreboding and oppressive, but really striking. So it's amazing that they didn't just get rid of them completely, but they sort of pulled them down and then stashed them away in that park, and then obviously make a tidy sum off the tourism for it now. But that was really cool.
It's a little bit like it's how I see Britain, or at least England's going to be like that in about 10 years' time.
You think someone will make brutalist statues of Boris Johnson? Yeah,
and if you touch them, you'll get put in jail for 200 years. I think that's the way things are going anyway. But yeah, we also went for a walk because there's supposed to be some nice parks around Budapest, aren't they? And it's also worth saying that the Danube flows through Budapest. I think that was maybe my first encounter with the Danube, which for me is a big deal. I think it's probably because it's named after me. No, but Budapest was actually two different places that became one city. Buda and Pest were two different places. Did you know that?
Yeah, we've read the same books.
But the next stop after Budapest was Hortobágy.
Well, this is where we get into the trip proper, really, isn't it?
Yeah, this is where it really started. I remember because we got a train from Budapest to Hortobágy, and we had a meal in Budapest railway station because they have these like railway restaurants, and it's that's what I love about parts of Eastern and Central Europe. They have these almost like proper formal restaurants where you're getting like waited on by usually men in their 50s or sometimes even older, who are wearing sort of like black waistcoat and a shirt and black trousers.
You're being waited on
just remember that.
By Ralph Fiennes in the Grand Budapest Hotel.
It's just exactly like that, but it feels like a hotel restaurant, and I think I must have had like goulash. I think I had.
Yeah, I know. I definitely had some goulash there. It was amazing. If you got the same standard of food at an English train station.
What's the equivalent here? It's like
Burger King,
or you have to go to M&S nowadays, don't you? Or it's something like upper crust. it's just incomparable. It's not the same. It's not the same service, is it? But I remember that journey because I think it was a relief. I was just maybe starting to chill out at that point. But I remember when we were leaving Budapest and looking out the window of the train and seeing people living in the woods. There were obviously people who were homeless and didn't have anywhere else to go, but that was quite shocking. I didn't expect to see that.
No, yeah. I don't know. I don't know whether they were homeless or they could have been just like sort of travelers.
Well, I mean, because this was just before there was the massive movement of people from the conflict in Syria. And I do wonder if some of the people that we actually saw, because, I mean, one of the defining memories of this trip was just seeing all of the people who were living alongside the road, like even in a field, or there was one image I remember seeing outside Brasov in Romania of someone just living under a piece of plastic in a field outside the city.
Yeah. Well, there was a lot of plastic around to be used for shelters.
Indeed. But I remember seeing that, and you kind of go to some places and it can kind of make you think that not, everything's not quite as it seems. But yeah, that was quite striking. But then we travelled. I mean, it's probably worth saying for people who don't know, Hungary is a very flat country. So this was quite a steady journey through the open plains of Hungary, and we were heading to Hortobágy. Is generally known as the Great Hungarian. Well, I mean that's a town in it, but the landscape is known as the Great Hungarian Plain, and there used to be an ocean there. I think it's known as the Pannonian Sea, which is what made it so shallow, made it the landscape that it is today. But yeah, what were your first impressions of getting off the train in Hortobágy?
My first impressions, I mean, I know you told me not to swear. I don't know if you asked any of your other guests not to swear before they came on, but when I first got to Hortobágy, I thought, where the fudge am I? Like it was a proper random place. You were just in this weird little village out in the middle of nowhere. I did think, where have I come to? And actually, that was the starting point on that trip. Ever since we got to Hortobágy, the people you met and that spoke to you said, "Why have you come here?" And then when he sort of laughed and said, "Oh, we're on holiday or whatever," they were like, "Seriously, why have you come here?" And I did wonder the same myself. But I mean, yeah, it was a strange place.
I think it's because we particularly wanted to go there to go to the Hortobágy fish ponds, as they're known, not for fishing, but to the wetlands there, to world-renowned wetlands that are found in the Great Hungarian Plain.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's world-renowned, I think, for its wildlife, and in sort of peak spring, it's just well, I don't know. It's like a stop-off point for many raptors on migratory routes, or.
Yeah, so for those of you who aren't really into birding, it's a place where a lot of sort of birds of prey they travel between Europe and Africa, are they? Or
I guess so.
Yeah.
We should know more.
we should know more, but I don't know. I've gone the way of mushrooms rather than than deep bird ecology, to be quite honest. But those fish ponds are world renowned, and you can see why. I mean, in bird terms, it's basically lots of reed beds and also large. I suppose we'd call them lakes in the UK, but there's a culture in parts of Eastern and Central Europe of having large fish ponds, and those fish ponds were created in medieval times from natural water bodies and have been, I believe, a lot of them have been sort of artificially stocked with fish. So, Eddie, we went to Czechia. We went to Czechia in 2016, wasn't it? 2017? Well, no, in 2017. And we visited some of the fish ponds in Moravia in Czechia, which is near the Slovakian border. But there are amazing places for wildlife, particularly birds, but also invertebrates and bats as well. You get lots of bats around there. But Hortobágy, we stayed it was quite a strange place. It was it was like a one-story, quite open sort of hotel.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it was obviously it was obviously there for a reason, that hotel as well, because I think a lot of people must travel to Hortobágy to visit these places and to go bird watching. Because I remember seeing in the hallway there was like a, like a wall chart with all the birds you could see there. But it was a nice enough place. I know that, after my initial impressions of Hortobágy and thinking, where the hell am I? It was quite nice sitting there because it was actually done. It was my birthday that day. I remember kicking back once we got to the hostel, which I managed to scavenge some beers at a local shop, and we were sat outside just taking a breather, and there were cranes flying overhead. So it's actually a pretty good place.
Happy birthday!
Cheers, mate.
I probably wished it to you on the day, but just because you sounded a little bit like you've been left out there. But
well, you're like, oh, I remember it because of this. I remember it because of that. I remember it because it was my birthday.
It was a strange place to have a birthday for you, I suppose. I think one of the things as well that was quite strange about it, which is, in England, I know you're in Scotland, but particularly in England, there's an obsession with tidiness, and you don't, particularly in the south of England. So if there's any like disused buildings that are within the site of a main road or something, they're often getting kind of knocked down and built into something else. But around Hortobágy, there were so many disused buildings, weren't there? A lot of them looked to be sort of Soviet era, and some of them probably earlier than that. But I think some of the buildings that stuck out most for me were those sort of like, I don't know what they were. They're quite typical of the Great Hungarian Plain. There were these little empty huts that looked like they were kind of shelter for people who were maybe shepherding or maybe for livestock out on the plains, and or maybe they were for storing hay. I don't know, but they were so iconic. These little sort of they had these little sort of triangular roofs, didn't they? And they were really, really iconic part of the landscape there. But there was also the wells. Can you remember anything about those wells?
I can remember they looked, I can see them in my head, but we never operated any. So
no, but I remember in my guidebook about the Great Hungarian Plain, it said that people used to use the wells and putting the arm of the lever in different ways to give messages to people.
Right.
So I think they'd sometimes use them as warnings and this, that, and the other. So I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, we should. So we went. We had a really good day in Hortobágy, didn't we? We had 2 full days there, and we walked. I mean, you think we walked something like 20 to 30 miles in one day, don't you? To visit.
I think it was over 20 miles, because I think we initially went into the information centre on our first full day, and we're asking about travel. How would we get to the fish ponds? And the woman said, "No, it's a bank holiday. There's no trains. There's no trains today." So we said, "Oh well, we'll have to walk then," because we took a quick look at the basic sort of tourist map, and we thought, "Yeah, that doesn't look so far," but it was about 10 miles there, I think. Same back, lots of walking around when we actually got there. But yeah, it was a long walk.
I remember that day the weather was particularly good. It was really sunny, and that
was the first good weather we'd actually had, because when I landed, it was snowing. It snowed at the communist statue park. It wasn't a particularly nice day the day before when we travelled, and then finally, here was some sunshine.
Yeah, and I remember we walked, because we were staying on one really quite far out on the side of town. I think this will probably be interesting for people who want to visit there in the future, and I think there'll probably be some people who are desperate to go, probably wanted to go in 2020.
Inspired by this talk.
Oh yeah, I mean that's why. I mean the tourism in Hortobágy is going to break records after this is published. This episode is put online. But we were staying quite far out of town, weren't we? I mean, I say town. It was basically. It was a plain with some buildings on it and rivers and wetlands, and a road that runs through it, a sort of main road connecting from sort of east to west.
It was a tiny village, really. I don't think it is a town.
No, it's a village, definitely. But I remember we walked through the village, and there were storks, weren't there, nesting on like I think they're on like street lamps or telegraph poles or specifically made structures for them.
Yeah, so iconic sort of storks nests on top of telegraph poles, and so that was a really good. On that day, our first day when we actually got some sunshine and some nice weather, our spirits were pretty high when we got to see storks up close, and you could hear them. You saw the chattering noise of them, their clicking beaks. When they sort of greet each other to reaffirm their bonds or whatever they're doing. So the air was full of that sound. There were storks everywhere. Blossom in the trees.
Yeah, blossom in the trees. Yeah, we should be careful because you said that we were high when we saw the storks. Let's just clarify. It was first thing in the morning, and all we'd had for breakfast.
The breakfast was palinka.
Had we? No. I could see how you get into that routine if you were there, because it just seems so normal. I think it's usually a sausage-based breakfast in that part of the world, and a variety of breads. But yeah, Hungarian food is nice, very nice indeed, and a lot of paprika used, of course. But one thing I remember was the house sparrows were nesting in the underside of the stork's nest. Do you remember that?
No.
Well, you missed out because it was great.
Mate, we went all that way and we saw these wonderful birds. We saw storks and all these other wonderful birds, and you're talking to me about sparrows. Well,
I was living in London at the time, and house sparrows have just disappeared. So I was delighted. Seeing a house sparrow was like seeing a golden eagle. Obviously not quite true. I now live in Sussex, and there's lots of them in my garden every day, but I still love them and I still appreciate them. But yeah, so we walked through the town. I remember we went to the visitor centre for the national park, because it is actually a national park. I should have said that. And I bought a Great Bustard T-shirt.
You did?
Yeah, because I think there's great bustards out on the plains there, aren't there?
Apparently, we didn't see any.
Did you know that the Great Bustard was eradicated in England? It was like a competition. There'd be competitions in counties to see who could eradicate the final Great Bustard.
Really? Wow. Brilliant. Thanks for that, guys.
Is that why you moved to Scotland?
I heard there was one more Great Bustard up here.
Yeah.
I wanted to get it.
I should say, for people who don't know what a Great Bustard is, it looks almost like an ostrich. It's a very large bird that, as I said earlier, is mentioned by Patrick Lee Fermor in Between the Woods and the Water. But we walked through Horta-Bargy, and we went on this massive trek. But I remember that it was a lovely sunny day, and there were hares boxing in the fields. Mm-hmm. You say fields, it's like it's the flattest, most open place I've ever been to, I think.
It's hard to describe. It is so flat. But at the same time, it was actually really beautiful. It's so flat that your attention sort of goes from the ground beneath you to the sky, because the sky is just there on level with your eyes. So you just get these big, amazing vistas, just flooded with blue and amazing sort of cloudscapes. And you notice that more than a landscape. Yeah,
the cloudscapes were absolutely amazing, weren't they? And I think there was also a sort of yellow wagtail. Do you remember seeing that? There was a red fox.
I do remember seeing a yellow wagtail. There were corn buntings. I remember that.
Yeah, and a corn bunting is a bird that's really declined in Britain, but it was really, really common out there, wasn't it? And obviously it's not obvious, but it was an agricultural landscape that was farmed. It didn't seem to be farmed that heavily, really, did it? But I know there's a lot of species there that are actually dependent on that open landscape. And I think one of the things that people don't realise, I know everyone wants woodland, and I love woodlands as well, but these open grasslands known as steppe grasslands, they're actually some of the most threatened landscapes on Earth. And it's because of the kind of the species that you only find in those habitats, and also that large free roaming landscape, which you don't really get so much anymore. But we went on this massive trek, didn't we? And I remember we passed this sort of kennel, this area of kennels, and there were like 100 dogs.
Yeah. So I don't know if they were like, was it not like a small farmstead, and then there were loads of guard dogs there, because the racket that they made when we started approaching, there was just us two. So imagine this big flat landscape with barely any features whatsoever. And then we approached this building, and then there was suddenly a cacophony of these big, scary-looking, growling dogs. And I really sort of emphasised the sense of, where are we? It was quite intimidating, actually.
You're absolutely right in saying that, because it was a combination of that weird experience of seeing all those dogs. I think they probably were guard dogs, because they were super intimidating. And there was a massive farm building there. And I think it's because it was so isolated. Maybe they were there because, the farmer or the landowner was just worried about things being stolen from there. And it was, I mean, they were an alarm call, weren't they? Those dogs. I remember they were all big.
We didn't steal anything.
No, we were like a mile away. We were on the track, because there was I think there was like one path that ran. It was like a trackway that ran in between the fields.
Yeah.
There were almost no trees. I think the only trees I think we saw were like false acacia, which is sort of invasive species that had kind of taken over in some of the areas around any buildings and things. But it was so open, and I think it was just the silence of the place as well. When you couldn't hear the wind or you couldn't hear anything, it was like nothing I'd experienced before, I don't think. We finally arrived at Hortoboji Halasto.
Halasto fish ponds, yeah.
Means fish ponds, yeah.
It's funny listening to you actually like pluck the names out, because I can't remember any of the place names, and obviously because they're Hungarian names, like I'm even less likely to remember them. So it's nice. It's taking me back hearing you speak them so sweetly.
The memory I have of first arriving there is that it looked closed. I mean, it's a completely open landscape, but there was like a train station stop there or nearby, and there was like a visitor centre, wasn't there? But it was obviously an old industrial building related to the fish pond that had been converted.
It was just a hut. It was just a hut that somebody sat in all day and took your money when you wanted to go and watch some birds.
Did we not? Were we unsure whether you had to pay to get in or something like that?
We definitely paid. You could have just strolled in, because there wasn't like a fence or a gate or anything. But there was a sign saying this is how much it is to come in.
Yeah. I can't remember if we paid anyone, but there was a little single gauge railway, wasn't there, that ran up and down, which I think is probably in use. But I remember the reed beds, and I remember really quickly we encountered, and this is a bird name that's going to make some people laugh if they're not familiar with bird names, but bearded tit.
He's not talking about me either.
You're well, people can't see the Zoom, so they have no understanding of your facial hair, which just sounds weird. But in the reed beds were sort of pinging in the reed beds, weren't they?
They were, yeah. It just felt like there was a flurry of birds upon getting there. It really. It was a good feeling of elation, because you felt like you were really getting into it. Then we'd been in Budapest, and it was sort of. I think we both felt a bit claustrophobic. We were looking forward to getting outside in the countryside and seeing some birds. And when we finally got to the fish ponds, they were all there for us. We saw bearded tit, and we were flushing out purple herons, and marsh harriers were everywhere you looked. It was a really great place, full of life.
But there was a lot going on there as well, because though I said it looked like empty and stuff, if this was in the UK, it would have had 50 people with their Swarovski binoculars and scopes and stuff like that, and their cameras with their massive lenses. But there weren't any other visitors there, from what I remember. But there were people working there. There were some Hungarian men who were they like pulling fish out of one of the ponds with like a big claw thing?
Yeah, I think so. Like an industrial fishing. I think they were like perch.
I'm not up on my fish.
Big bulging net full of them.
I'm not great with fish. In many ways, I cannot stand fish generally. But Yeah, I think I did get a photo of them kind of removing like a net's worth of fish out of the water and putting them into the back of a sort of lorry or something like that, I think.
Yeah, it was some industrial fish action.
But it goes to show you, doesn't it? I mean, this is basically a form of agriculture, but one of the richest places in Europe for birds as well. So,
well, they are industrial fish ponds, aren't they? And I think everything, all the bird life that seems to have congregated around it or found a home there is sort of added bonus.
Yeah. And I also remember something quite harrowing that happened, not to us. We'll get to that a bit later. That's another day. But walking alongside, there was like a canal, there was like a canal that was cut across. So we were on one side of it, and you could sometimes there was a little bridge you could cross over.
Yeah, so there are like trenches between the fish ponds. Yeah,
but there was a mallard. I think there was a mallard duck with her ducklings swimming down one of them, and one of the ducklings just got pulled under, didn't it, by like a pike?
Yeah, it must have been a pike.
Yeah. And I was like, oh man, that's brutal fish.
And you knew you were really in the wild.
I didn't know there were sharks there. But anyway, I remember the breaks. There were breaks in the reed beds, and that's where we saw a pygmy cormorant.
Well, we saw our first one. By the end of the day, you were sick of seeing them.
Yeah, I know, but it was our first one. But they're one of the things that you only really see in places like that, don't you?
I don't think I even knew that there was a pygmy cormorant until we saw that. We just saw a bird, obviously. I say obviously, but in this country we see cormorants all the time in your local canals, and you just looked at this one and thought, that doesn't look quite right. That looks really strange. And I think it's only when we looked in the bird guide and saw that it was a pygmy cormorant.
You see cormorants all the time, but you don't see tiny little cormorants like the pygmy cormorant, which is a very cute little one. Cormorants are quite divisive.
They know what they want and they get it.
Cormorants are quite divisive in the UK because they eat fish, and some people don't like that. Let's not get into that. But I think one of the most sort of epic wildlife experience we had was when we climbed up into one of those towers. I say climbed, walked up some stairs into one of those lookout towers across the fish ponds, and we saw in the sky lots of raptors circling, didn't we? Yeah. Do you remember that?
Yeah. It must have been about 6 or 7. And I think it was white-tailed eagles.
There might have even been something like a lesser spotted eagle in there. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I'm not up on my eagles either.
Well, that was another great thing about the place. You caught or you snatched little views of eagles all the time. Or big birds, and the kind of birds that if you're a bird watcher, you start going, oh, what's that? And get really excited. It could have been lesser spotted eagles or steppe eagles or what. I don't think we were quite good enough birders to fully identify them.
No, and they were just specks in the sort of blue sky, weren't they? It was really difficult to actually make it out. I mean, I took a photo, and when I had a look at it again, I could see there was a different scale to some of the birds, but I think when we went back down onto ground level, there was a break in the reeds, and you could see into one of the fish ponds that seemed to have been drained.
Yeah.
And it was just mud. And I remember we saw a white-tailed eagle on the ground there.
Yeah.
And it was so striking because it just looked like a person. It was so big.
Yeah, it was massive. Yeah. It was like sitting on a bench.
And he got his sandwich out and started looking at his phone. That didn't happen. But it looked, because it had the white plumage, didn't it, on its head, and it was a beautiful bird.
Amazing.
But yeah, and then we obviously had to walk back that way, and I remember walking back along the way. We'd come past the kennels or the guard dogs that were barking at us. But I remember we saw a beautiful red fox, and it looked in wonderful condition, and the sunset was spectacular as well.
Yeah. It was a really good evening. But it was at that point I was thinking, geez, this is a really long walk. No, I think I was ready to get home, and I hadn't put any sun cream on that day, I don't think. And we've been out on a plain with no tree cover all day, and I was feeling pretty sunburnt. It was probably looking very sunburnt as well.
Yeah, but it was the evenings when we went for dinner in the sports bar.
Yeah, the wonderful sports bar where they only serve pizzas. Oh, that's not actually true. You did have some other sort of steak-based meal, didn't you?
I can only remember the pizzas, but they didn't taste like pizza.
Didn't they have, like, you know, when they do pizzas with a white sauce rather than a red sauce? It's like a garlic or like a white garlic sauce instead of having a tomato sauce. And they did them there, and they called it a Viking pizza.
I don't know how you've remembered that. All I remember is some very weird tasting pepperoni that was obviously not pepperoni. It was probably more of a Hungarian style of sausage.
If it's food, I remember it.
I do remember the second night that we stayed there and hearing a little owl calling outside our window. And I don't think I knew what a little owl sounded like at that time.
Speaking of owls, there was a wonderful period, like when we went to the fish ponds that day, a sort of crowning moment of the day as we were just leaving. There was a selection of bird boxes essentially, but it seemed to be like a little community of kestrels living there, and we were stood there for a short while just enjoying the kestrels. And then I looked in one of the boxes, and then there was a long-eared owl staring right back at us, which was just amazing. I'd never seen one of those before. Yeah,
and there were lots of these boxes they were on poles, weren't they? They weren't just in the trees, because there really weren't many trees. But I remember standing looking at, just back before we were heading off from the fish ponds, and there was a flock of cranes went over in a formation.
Yeah,
which was maybe the first time I'd ever seen them do that. And there were loads of kestrels, weren't there, in the boxes?
Yeah.
But I only learned later, when someone told me from the photos, that they weren't normal kestrels, they were lesser kestrels, which are more likely to nest communally.
Yeah, and also there was a squadron of spoonbills went over either just before or just after the cranes. It was like, a little 10-minute burst of bird fireworks.
Bird fireworks, I like it. And there was also a half-naked bodybuilder with a short-haired owl head.
Face down in a reed bed.
And that's when we knew it was time to leave and head to the sports bar. So that was our day at the fish ponds in Hortobashi, but we had an extra day, and so we travelled by train this time to a place which, again, I'm going to mispronounce, so apologies for that, but we were heading to Lake Teja, which is a lake that was once the River Teja, which is one of the great rivers of Europe, or was one of the great rivers of Europe.
Until we got there.
And ruined everything. But we got a train from Hortobashi to a place called Teja Fured. And again, I'm going to mispronounce that. I'm really sorry, but I'm doing my best here. And I think I remember just feeling a little bit lost and a little bit like, what are we doing? And maybe we'd been there a bit too long. Maybe the weather wasn't quite, the season wasn't quite where it needs to be. It's still quite cold. There was still a sort of a wind, but I think we're probably absolutely exhausted from that day hiking across the Great Hungarian Plain the day before. But I remember we needed supplies, didn't we? And we had some real difficulty getting water that wasn't fizzy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And this is a problem I've found. It sounds weird saying it, but it's a problem I've found anywhere I've gone abroad. You go on holiday to hot places and you think, oh yeah, I better buy some water and stay hydrated. And so often, this might not be a problem for people who like fizzy water, but so often you go to open your water that you've been so clever to buy ahead of being really dehydrated, and you crack open that lid and you just hear that, and you're like, oh no, I hate fizzy water. This is not gonna do the trick whatsoever. This was definitely the case when we were in Hungary. But we did learn one trick, is that if you wanted flat, still water, I don't know why they had pictures of babies on them, but there was definitely one of the brands did a bottled water that had a picture of a baby on, and we learned that was the one if you wanted still water. Get the baby water.
Yeah, so it was known as baby water from then on. And we did have another encounter with this baby water when we were out on the water, quite strangely. But
Slick.
That's what I'm here for. Eddie, that's why they pay me the big bucks.
I can tell you do a podcast.
We were in Chesterfield. We went to a shop, which was quite a strange shop. It was like going into someone's living room.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember it was like a water tower, but it said Pepsi on it?
Yeah, I do remember. Yeah, I remember because I remember the skyline of that town once we got there.
It's almost like that's where Pepsi was discovered. Because it was maybe, the River Teja was actually the home of Pepsi, but there are other cola drink brands available as well.
Baby cola.
I think that we wanted to get out and about around Lake Teja, didn't we? And we were feeling a little bit at a loose end. I remember there'd obviously been some money spent on like interpretation boards and by the river, and it had just been totally destroyed and like set on fire and stuff like that. So there's obviously not a lot for people to do if they were doing that. And I'm not just going to blame young people, because you don't know, it could have been anyone who'd done that. But we managed to get to a place where we knew we could rent a boat to take out on the river.
And at the time, that was a total, day changer. My mood instantly was more upbeat, because what was turning into a strange day walking around a grey town, here was a boat hire place, and it was back on. That
for me felt like one of the best things that had ever happened.
Oh, it was it was going to be a great day.
It was potentially the greatest ever day we were going to have in Hungary, but it turned out to be potentially almost the worst day of our lives. So we went, and I think it was also from walking all the time and being stuck on a train and not really knowing.
You wanted to sit down.
I was like, let me just say, I can't really swim. I can do 10 meters, and I've got the trunks with the badge on from when I was 8 years old to prove it, if anyone wants the evidence. But
did you tell the guy who hired us a boat that you couldn't swim?
I can't remember. I remember that we went to there was like a shack, wasn't there? And there was like sort of like a quay on the river. So there was sort of like a wooden pier that was coming out. It was a small little walkway, like a gangway. And there were three men, and there was one guy who looked about 18, and he was wearing like camouflage gear. I think they all wore camouflage gear, but we approached them and said, do you speak English? Because we could speak.
We want a boat.
we need a boat, and we need to rescue this trip. Even though we'd had a really good day the day before, I think we had too high standards, didn't we? We'd had a really good day. We just needed to chill out, and this was probably the root of our problems. And they were like, yeah, sure, here's the boat. And I was like, do we need it for a certain amount of time? Do we need to give it back a certain time? Like, yeah, just whenever. It's all good. But we were really a bit silly, because we didn't ask for like life jackets. Like, we took this boat out and we didn't have any life-saving or safety equipment.
I mean, and it was just, it was a very relaxed transaction of hiring this boat. For people listening, it wasn't like they were rowing boats at your local park. These were motorized boats. I'd certainly never driven one before.
No, I'd never been near one, so I didn't know what I was doing. And I think that showed. And I think we had to keep swapping, didn't we? And I was like, oh, you do it 5 minutes, I'll do it 5 minutes. But to be honest, we got the boat out onto the river, and it was. Sorry, my cat's moving around in the background. We got out onto the river, and there were the willows were all coming into leaf. They were covered in catkins, and there was poplars coming into leaf, and the reed beds were starting to wake up with all the bird life. And it felt so great, didn't it? It was like,
what a feeling! It was
like
great.
We're out there. We're in complete control of ourselves. It felt so freeing to be able to just get a boat out on the river. And who knew where we were going? And I think we had a map, didn't we? We had this map that we got somewhere, maybe in one of the visitor centres, or I definitely had some maps with me.
There was we got given a basic map. So when we got on the boat, the guy sort of held up the map and was like, "This is where you're going to go. Just follow it all around, follow this line, and we'll see you back here in a bit."
And it just didn't work out that way. I remember it was just brilliant because we were taking the boat through the water. We went through this sort of channel with all these trees that had fallen down over the channel, and there were obviously signs of like beavers around. I think there were beavers in Hungary, and you know that all these trees had fallen down over the channel, and we kind of had to move slowly through them and like pull them out of the way and stuff. And it was like being on the Amazon or something, which I obviously have no experience of that. Well, I don't have any experience of that. I've never been outside of Europe, but and we got to the channel, then opened out, and I think there was we saw a white-tailed eagle through the trees. Yeah. There was there's a bird called a penduline tit, which makes this sort of beautiful woven basket for a nest which hangs from the trees, and it's not a species that you're ever really going to see in England, but for the odd one or two that get here sort of by accident, or to the UK that get here by accident. And it was these sorts of things like, this is the experience we wanted, you know, really kind of immersed in the wilds of Hungary and the River Teja. But I remember we were going down this channel and there were sort of trees on either side, and in the distance was Lake Teja. And so it's obviously where they dammed it whenever they did that. And but we passed by this guy who was fishing, and he was kind of his boat was kind of at lengthways across the channel, and we were obviously going straight down the channel. And he stood up on his boat and he got his fishing rod up and he chucked the line out across, and it just missed my head. Do you remember that?
No, I don't remember that. I kind of remember the guy fishing, but I don't remember him vindictively lashing out at you with his fishing hook.
He definitely did it because he was annoyed that we were there disturbing his peace on the beautiful River Teja.
He didn't like someone muscling in on his boat action.
We were rocking his boat, and he didn't like it. Okay, I'm telling you, it was more than passive aggressive, but it was like, who are these two English fools disturbing my fishing trip, my morning fishing? But from there, I feel like that was a sign about what was about to go wrong. Maybe
Teja's gonna get you.
Yeah. So what happened next, anyway?
Well, we passed through what can only be described as like a Jurassic Park style gateway onto the lake, and then we were out on the high seas. Then what once was like a nice little channel shaded by trees, you were in a wide open lake, and I was a little bit frightening, to be honest, because the wind was in your hair. I mean, it was also exciting because you felt like you could pick up the speed of the boat a little bit, but also I felt a little bit lost. Like when we looked at the map or, tried to piece that together with the lake, I suddenly felt like I'm going to lose my way here, or I'm not really sure where I am anymore, or whether I'm actually following where I'm supposed to go.
The pictures that I took from the front of the boat, it just looks magical, doesn't it? It's this river with all these willows and poplars reaching over towards the water, and it's really beautiful. It was quite a grey day, wasn't it?
It does, but these little channels with the trees, it looks green and bright, and then once we got out onto the lake, it was definitely grey and menacing.
Yeah, indeed. But when we got to the end of this channel, I remember thinking, I think I probably said to you, I was like, should we turn back? Should we really? Because the lake opened out and it looked to me like the sea. It looked like the Irish Sea. It was really choppy. It looked quite agitated, the lake. It was really windy out there, and the kind of protection of the poplars and the willows, that was gone. We made the decision to go out onto the river, but it was ridiculous because we didn't have a plan of where we were going. And I think I really do. I think sometimes, when you're kind of lying in bed at night and you can't get to sleep and your mind is looking for all the worst possible things it can, I do think back to that and think how stupid that decision was to go out onto that river, because we didn't have any life jackets with us.
I
mean, I don't know how well you can swim, but
I can swim. But yeah, if you look at it, if you just count the issues on your hand there, but we didn't have life jackets. You couldn't swim. We didn't know where we were going. We'd never driven a motorboat before. I mean, it doesn't look good, does it?
And I think this is how these things happen when you're traveling in an unfamiliar place, because you don't have the same things that kind of root you in reality, and because you don't have the same kind of routine or pressures on your time, maybe, that you just make stupid decisions. But anyway, we went straight out onto the water, and I think immediately when we got out there, the boat was more difficult to control and to drive.
And also, we'd seen quite a few other people on boats before that point. And then once we were out on the main lake, you couldn't really see anybody.
No, there was no one. But I just remember us thinking, we were just on the water. I think we just thought it was going to be like Lake Placid or something like that, which is a horror movie, so it almost was like that. I just remember the boat jumping, and I think we had to increase the throttle in driving the boat and use more petrol and more power because the water was so much more powerful. And I think I can remember the boat was leaving the water a bit, and I was like, this isn't normal. And there was this panic setting in of like, what are we doing? And we might be about to, I don't know, the boat might capsize or something.
Well, I mean, it didn't stop us. It didn't stop us because we knew. So this was like it's another nature reserve essentially, and there's other islands out on this lake, which is quite a big lake. I mean, it's not like the lake at your local park. It's huge. Anyway, it's like a nature reserve. And there's also all these little islands on there that have like bird watching towers. We actually need to have a permit to go and visit and moor your boat up at. And even though we didn't have a permit and we knew that we didn't or shouldn't be there, we still aimed straight for one of these islands and moored up our boat.
Yeah, and I remember that. I remember we could see that there was an island in the distance, and we were just like, we just got to go for it. And it started to feel like if we didn't just aim for this island and for this little like plank, this small little gangway,
rickety pier.
We just had to aim for this pier and this island, and it was like, we just have to get there. We just have to do it. And it was just, it felt like if we didn't, we had no other option but to go there. The water was just too choppy. It was just too dangerous. And I think that the scarier bit was probably what happened next, wasn't it?
You're saying like we just had to do it. The water was so choppy, so we fled for safety further away from the actual safety and moored up on this island. And I think we moored our boat in the wrong way as well. We sort of braced it up against the pier where the waves were smashing up against it, and we sort of got out of the boat and wandered around the island for a little bit. And I don't know if we did climb the bird watching tower or not, but it obviously wasn't that memorable because I can't remember seeing any birds.
It's really weird you talking about that because for me it was like something out of Planet of the Apes. Because we got the boat. We were trying to get it up onto the bank. I mean, I didn't know how to moor a boat. Never done that before. And we just kind of got it against the side, and we were desperately trying to tie it up, and it was just getting smashed against this little pier, and it was just filling up with water, and like petrol was mixing.
Yeah, somehow we'd managed to unhook whatever connecting pipe it was. It was going from the petrol can that was in the boat to the motor. So as well as all the water that was smashing up against the side of the boat, going into the boat, we also had petrol sort of spilling out into the bottom of the boat. If we tried to take that boat anywhere, I mean, we tried to take it back off the island and failed because it was so wedged in one position. But if we did, it probably would have just sunk with us in it as well.
Yeah, and that's when it started to feel like I was, it was like, it was really worried. It was really scary because it was like this boat is filling up. And I was like, is this going to end well? That's what I was thinking. Like,
it already ended. It had already gone wrong, mate.
Well, no, but it had gone to the next stage, hadn't it? Because we were on this island, and I was thinking, I was looking at you and thinking, you're like over 6 foot something, and I was like, if it comes to it, are we going to have a battle to the death here to see who survives?
6 foot. You were just sort of thinking, there's more of him than there is of me. We could probably eat a bit of him, and he'll be all right.
Well, no, thankfully it never got that bad. But I was just thinking, is one of us going to have to become sort of king of this island? Because it just felt so remote. It was like, well, I'm obviously joking about that, but it was this weird island of scrub, but also a Hungarian flag. Do you remember that?
No.
There was a massive Hungarian flag on a pole like beyond the scrub, and it's I wondered if it might be like a sort of M. Night Shyamalan film. If you go through the scrub and there's this whole community of people who've never been,
who never got off the island,
But
tourists.
I think I was also just a bit worried because we really damaged this boat, or we thought maybe we had damaged it. But we had a phone number, didn't we?
Yeah. So when it got to the point that we were thinking, we tried and failed to sort of get the boat going again, and we were thinking we actually need some help here. Well, we actually had set off. The guy who gave us the boat had given us a number and said, if you get any trouble, give us a call on this number, which is what we decided to do. But I remember like a couple of really sketchy conversations with this person on the other end of the phone, because the first person I spoke to didn't actually speak very good English. I didn't speak any good Hungarian either.
He spoke German. I remember.
Well, no, that was the guy. I think eventually we spoke to somebody who spoke German, and then we had like a bit of a broken conversation between English and German. Miraculously managed to explain where we were and what had happened. I don't feel like the phone conversation concluded with like, oh, we're going to come and get you then. Just hang tight. I think they just kind of said, oh yeah, right, okay, we know where you are, and then hung the phone up, and then we were just left there thinking, oh well, hopefully something comes of that conversation.
Yeah, and I think I remember him saying 20 Minuten.
Oh, right, okay.
And I was like, yes, my German has saved our lives. Not that 20 Minuten is anything to boast about, 20 minutes. He was coming in 20 minutes anyway. But I remember, we were on this island, and I was like, it's fun, isn't it, how people are with nature, because everyone thinks nature is lovely and wonderful, and not everyone thinks that, but it's all cuddly, and nature is this wonderful thing. But those places, things can go really wrong out there, and it was quite scary and unforgiving.
I mean, it is, but at the same time, I'm sure plenty of people managed to navigate around that lake in a boat with no problem whatsoever. I think there's certainly some user issues here that were contributing to the problem.
No, I feel like such an idiot for the way that went, and we should never have got the boat out in the first place, because we didn't have safety equipment, and I can't swim further than 10 meters. But lesson learned, and I won't make that mistake again. But so we did eventually see this sort of larger boat coming, didn't we? And it was a fairly gruff man. He was wearing like a beanie hat and a big jacket. It was maybe camouflage. I mean, I think I've got a picture here. He was wearing camo trousers and a beanie hat and a kind of, is that like a navy blue sort of bomber jacket? But he didn't speak any English, and he seemed, I remember he pulled up and he moored himself like a pro, and he was a man in his sort of in his 50s, I'd say, sort of early 50s, and he started bailing, didn't he? He was bailing the boat, getting the water.
Well, first he sort of like, he bundled us into the boat, and then he attached our boat to his boat, and then he's dragged it back. So once we were back off the lake and in like the quiet waterways, we sort of just stopped for a while, and then we sheepishly just sat there in his boat while he got into our boat and started chucking bucketfuls of water out of it to obviously rid it of water. And at no point in that scenario did we say, would you like some help? We shouldn't have really asked that. We should have just got up and just got in there and done the same thing.
And to be honest, they probably remember that, and they're probably like, yeah, these two stupid English guys came and didn't know what they were doing. But it had quite a few sort of chunks taken out of the side. I mean, you could still use the boat, but and it got it back in one piece. But yeah.
I remember when we were sorting money out with the guy afterwards, and the guy was like, "What happened out there?" And I, gave a sort of brief explanation, and laughed sheepishly and went, "This kind of thing must happen all the time." And he went, "No, you're very special."
Yeah, he's like, "No, this doesn't happen." I was like, "Okay, well, thanks very much. We'll go now." And,
yeah, you couldn't wait to get out of there, mate.
No, it wasn't a great experience. So I think the moral of the story is, do go and visit Lake Teja and do visit the River Teja, but don't make the same mistake that we did. Do get a boat maybe, but maybe ask for some safety equipment as well before you go.
Yeah, and if you do get rescued by a gruff German guy in a beanie hat and camo trousers, say hi.
He was Hungarian.
Was he? You sure?
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. So I think that ridiculousness takes us to the end of part 1 of our journey through Hungary and Romania. So join us in part 2 as we chart our journey across the Hungarian border into Romania, to Transylvania, and then to the High Carpathians. Thanks for listening.
See you next time.